Originally, it appeared as though the United States was going to follow some of the same policies that we saw in the 1930s. In the winter of 2009, a stimulus package for the economy, in other words, more government spending, with the idea that we would reinvest in the country's infrastructure. This very much concerned the Republican Party in the United States, which had begun to move increasingly in a rightward direction. So they saw this, in other words, as an ideological threat. And they began to undermine this stimulus package. Instead of it going towards things such as building new roads, high-speed rail, other infrastructure, it went to things such as tax cuts. So we did not have the investment in infrastructure and education that we thought we would have. But the public was told the opposite. We have some very conservative media outlets that kept pressing the message that we had a large stimulus bill which should have fixed the economy. And therefore, what was needed was a dramatic cut in budgets, not an increase in them. And that's what we got. Now, this ideological threat which I referenced resulted in a new, what we call in English, astroturf movement, which essentially means a false grassroots movement. You know, astroturf being like plastic grass.
И они это сравнивают с искусственным газоном. Да, это такое движение искусственного газона.
So some of the most powerful oligarchs in the United States who were interested in further tax cuts, less regulation on finance, funded these astroturf movements and to generate a popular support for reducing the size of governments and the public sector. In 2010, they succeeded in taking over the U.S. Congress, our chief legislative making body. And they pushed forward this agenda of actually trying to generate further crises, budgetary crises, because they believed that if you could generate a crisis, this presented another opportunity to cut government spending even further. So we've had this perpetual environment since 2010 of budgetary crisis, organized, orchestrated for the purpose of further budget cuts. Meanwhile, now this group is called the Tea Party. To make a brief historical reference, in 1775, during the American Revolution, one of the first acts of the revolution was by these protesters against the British and their policies, which was to dump all of this tea into the harbor in Boston. In fact, this represented a massive destruction of private property. Ironically, the Tea Party today holds private property as entirely sacred. So, since 2010, in effect, we've had a very radical, extremist political movement come to power in the United States, whose purpose is to again create perpetual economic crisis. And it's not just at the federal level that they operate, but at the state level. So they've taken over the majority of state governments. We have all of these budget crises now occurring simultaneously at the state level as well. Now, you may have seen in the news this past week that the United States has had another one of these big budget crises, resulting in the threat to shut down the federal government. This has resulted in the laying off of some 800,000 public employees. And this follows a crisis in the month of March in which we cut spending even further, resulting in the loss of 1.6 million jobs across the entire economy, private and public sector. Now, the result has been that the economy has stagnated instead of expanded. Contra the economic theory of the Tea Party, which states that any starving of the public sector results in an expansion of the private sector and economic growth. And so this is again where we find ourselves at the moment. One economic crisis after the other, with threats of further crises as the Tea Party demands ever greater cuts. The consequence of this, ironically, has to create even more problems for the government. Because we have more unemployed, we have more people on welfare. Public assistance spending has actually increased rather than decreased. So the response of the Tea Party has been to say that we need to be more like Greece and to just start cutting spending to the public public assistance programs as well. So this is the problem that we see with austerity generally. Now, on one level, the United States and countries like Russia, which issue their own currency, their own money, have the power to spend within the limits of their economy's productive capacity. And neither the United States nor Russia is doing so. The consequence is that we're impoverishing our middle class, and we're losing tremendous value from tens of millions, literally, of people in both countries that could be adding goods and services to the economy. So the issue now is whether or not we will see a change from this policy or whether we will see its continuation.